to say, but so we're focusing today on how and why you should evaluate digital services and thinking about some digital tools to help you with that. And I guess particularly timely, I think, given that people have rushed to digital service delivery during COVID, it's taken that step back and thinking about how do we evaluate if this stuff is actually working. Some of the work, so I've been doing some work recently with the Catalyst, so Debbie's in the room from CAST, and one of the people that was on the programme we ran just said, actually, having done some of the service design work and user interviews with people, we realised that digital meant to us just taking everything that we did face to face, and now we just do it all on a Zoom call. And actually, some of that's going to be appropriate, but how do we take time, take a step back and really understand what people need and start to really evaluate that, and then think about what that means for the rest of 2020 into the next year. So I'm going to shut up. Kylie has a really nice lamp, a big light more than a lamp, but nice nonetheless. So Kylie is head of product at Citizens Advice, and you've probably seen lots of amazing stuff that Citizens Advice have been doing. I'm going to put actually the Citizens Advice digital blog link in the chat, because there's some really good, like really simple things that even small charities can implement from the approach that Citizens Advice have been taking. Kylie's going to be talking about how they evaluate services and some other bits and bobs. You've got slides. Do you want to try and share screen? We'll see if it works. And
yeah,
if it doesn't, we'll panic or something. I don't know what we'll do. Is
that? All right, let's see. Oh, it's making me do sharing preferences. Give me a second. Do you want to ad lib, Ross, while I do that?
Yep, I will get that blog in. Right, so here's one of the things that Citizens Advice do that I quite like, and I'll probably explain it really badly, but using Google Analytics and satisfaction on page content.
Okay.
Oh, someone else is unmuted.
Just to say, I'm going to have to leave and join in a sec, so I'll be
That's
back
right.
in 1 sec.
Cool. Okay. So using satisfaction on page content. So was this page useful? So let's say it's a page on furloughing staff and what you have to do as an employee, and taking that satisfaction level with a page and mapping it against the Google Analytics data. So what they're not doing is there's tens of thousands of pages across Citizen Advice site. So what they're not constantly doing is thinking, God, we need to update tens of thousands of pages. One of those pages might have only had 2 visits in the last week, and actually it's not significant to people at this point in time in the year. And so what they're taking is what's really important to people right now, and what are the pages where that's not meeting that user need, and then they're ranking those pages as priority. And again, that's just a really simple thing. Like literally any of you who've got a website, a button on the website that says thumbs up or thumbs down, was this content useful? And mapping that against your Google Analytics data, and look at the 10 pages with the highest traffic on your site, and which out of those 10 are actually performing well, which are people satisfied. And if there's 6 of them that aren't, those 6 pieces of content need to be your focus, rather than thinking we're going to update some weird 14 deep about us page on the website that nobody's visited in 3 months. Right, let's see. I think we've got a share screen on the go, so this is good. Are you back with us, Kylie?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yay, there we go.
And can you see my screen?
Yeah, got it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for filling the time. It's great to be on the call. Thank you for inviting me. It's particularly nice to hear people with a stronger accent than the one that I've lost since I've been out of Scotland for 10 years. So I'm sure I'll go off this call and speak to my English colleagues again, and they'll be like, oh, you've got stronger again. So yes, as Ross said, I'm head of product at Citizens Advice. Sadly for me, that is Citizens Advice that covers England and Wales. There's a separate Citizens Advice that covers Scotland, but we are essentially sister organisations, so we work together quite a lot. And what I'm going to talk about today is how we do data and measurement. And I'm going to take the obvious example of COVID to talk about how we've been implementing that practically. So at the end, I've got some other resources which are more specific around, for example, product metrics, but I thought this would actually be a more relevant discussion to have, and more broadly covering the different types of services that we run, which include digital but aren't only digital. So I've been head of product at Citizens Advice for about 18 months. So have been through the kind of COVID cycle. Before that, I was in government. So this is my first charity gig. So I delivered services in big government departments in the UK and in Canada, where I came back from to take this job, which is the best job I've ever had. So let me tell you a bit about it and what we've been doing with data. So this is my little subtitle. what I learned about the nation during COVID and how we changed our services as a result. So just a bit of context, and I think it's relevant to whenever we're talking about data in our service delivery. Citizens Advice works across a number of levels, which makes it quite an interesting organisation. So it's both an advocacy organisation and a service delivery organisation, and it's not often that you get both of those things at quite the scale that we have. And it essentially means that we have a lot of data, both kind of individual personal level data, but a huge amount of trend level data. And part of the reason why we're so successful in our advocacy work is because we can use all of the learning that we get from the front line of helping people every day and using that to influence government and big organizations. So it's kind of a dual purpose that our measurement serves for us. And down at the bottom there, you can see the part that I most work on, which is our product and our content strategy. So what happened to Citizens Advice when COVID hit? Well, anyone who knows about Citizens Advice will know that we are famous for our face-to-face advice. So that means coming into one of our 270 odd local offices on the high street and getting help with something. That meant, of course, that COVID had to be a huge shift for us. So previously 60% of our services were delivered in one of these offices. And overnight that went to zero. So for us, it was a big organizational pivot. And it meant that my team in the digital bit were suddenly sort of thrown forward, as I'm sure all of you were, to make it happen and enable the whole of the former network to do stuff online where they can't do it face to face anymore. So there was a lot of coverage of some of the data that we published publicly, and it was both, as I said, used in our kind of campaigning work, but also used to change the way we're doing services. So hopefully my little video will work here. So this was some information that was published in a video on The Guardian. We make our webpage stats public, so anyone can access this data. And what you can see here is the month of April and what our web services were telling us about what people in the UK actually needed and what they were worried about. So the headline for this article in The Guardian was "Concerns of a Nation." And I think that's quite powerful here, because we can see that essentially we can learn from what people are coming to our website about to inform what services they're going to need in the near future. That's helpful for us because it means that we can really quickly develop more content on those particular topics and publish that kind of overnight, as it were, or we can use it to develop our services more broadly. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that. So this is one of the most interesting things I think we did with our data during that time. You can see the time period I've highlighted here. What this is a graph of is people making universal credit applications. So obviously we know that they peaked hugely in the past few months. The different lines that you can see are the comparison of what Citizens Advice predicted in terms of the trend of universal credit applications and what the Department of Work and Pensions thought would happen. So we made a prediction just before the 12th of April that in 2 weeks' time, 500,000 people would apply for universal credit. So that's 500,000 people going online to DWP's online service and applying for that benefit. And we did that based on a number of things. We did it based on the data that our local offices were telling us about, and we did it based on our web traffic, like what I just showed you. And this is the number that we came up with. 2 weeks later, the DWP published the official figures of how many people actually applied for universal credit, and it was this. So you can see that essentially we can be, I think we've started calling it like a flock of canaries in the coal mine, because we can almost with complete accuracy predict what is going to hit government before it hits government. And that's helpful because we have kind of relationships with big government departments, and we can help them know to what extent they have to scale things.
Can anyone else not hear?
Yeah, Kylie, your audio seems to have just gone. I don't know if you're
Am I
muted.
back?
Oh, there you go. You're back. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Sorry
Can I
about
ask
that.
just a personal favour? Could you go back to that last slide so that I can take a photograph of it, because it was pretty
Yeah.
incredible. The one, yeah, that one.
There you go. So yeah, so we were using it in our kind of relationships with government and helping them to understand how much provision they would need to put into their services. But it also helped us because we knew that we would have to be dealing with a lot of people coming to us for advice about getting through that application process. So that's just one example. And really what it told us was that the scale of advice that people were coming to us for was just always going to outstrip how much we could deliver through what we call human-enabled channels. So that's the phone, web chat, or face-to-face, which had obviously ended. So as a result of that, not only were we kind of using the data in the way I described, we used it to make basically a better case for improving and changing our technology. So this is part of the work that we're doing as a direct result of the past 6 months or so. We were already starting to scale some of the platforms that underpin our advice, but we've really managed to accelerate that. We're lucky that we managed to get some extra funding for this, so we've really put a rocket behind some of the work. What this is intended to do is break down our web content into ways that can be more easily shared. So for example, sharing through social media, doing things like personalization, and I guess in an evil world, you call it like targeted ads and things, but for us, it's about using what we know about people to provide them with a more personalized service that better meets demand. And we're also continuing to use all of our rich data on searches and other channels as well. So you can see here, this is just a snapshot of July and August and the different trends in what people were needing help with. So we continue to use these every day to inform new content that we publish and create. So just a quick conclusion, data evolves really quickly in a crisis. We think it's really important to embed that evaluation into our processes, and as a result, we can make better decisions. And that's me. Thank you.
I'll give you an actual clap. That was amazing. That was really, really interesting. The prediction stuff is utterly terrifying.
Yeah.
From a data perspective, but also I guess just terrifying from a societal perspective as well. That's really interesting. Have there been other areas where that's applied as well then?
Yeah, so our main areas that we deal with are benefits and debt, housing and employment. So basically anything in those areas. So we're pretty accurate on redundancy predictions and things like that as well. And the amount of people who are requesting, for example, support with council tax and so on.
Yeah. Can I ask a question just before we jump in as well? Do you have any advice on how other organizations could use that level of insight and leverage it to make decisions? So like whether it's just simply how are people finding us via search, and are we seeing changes in that, and therefore does that mean we need to adapt either content or how we provide advice to people?
Yeah, I think it's quite a simple learning that we had really, which was we have a lot of data and we've always had a lot of data, but what's changed recently is that we've started to talk about it in a more mature way. So for example, we have a weekly get together with people across the organization, particularly our operational colleagues, where our data experts will talk through the trends. And we used to do that before, but what we didn't do before was say, okay, what can that trend tell us about how we might need to change things in the future? And it's just the simplicity of having the conversation and regularly looking at that data, which was previously just in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And there's lots we can do to kind of make that more automated and easy to access, but just the sort of forum, I guess, to create and encourage that type of decision making.
Amazing. Any questions for Kylie? This is where I have to scroll through 4 screens in case someone has a hand up. Pat, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm sort of not into using data technology in a big way, because for 16 years I've been mainly face-to-face, but how do we, the public, sort of trust the handling of the data and so on? You know, are there trust issues?
We don't know, to be honest, we don't experience issues with trust at all. We're a very trusted brand. I mean, I could answer, obviously, the kind of official answer on how we handle data internally is very robust. But I think it's the change that we're going through in the next few years is that we've been great at using trends, and we've been great at using that for advocacy. So saying, you know, look, government, we can see these things happening in society. What we haven't been great at doing, and that's partly because the technology wasn't there, is using people's information on a personal level where they give that permission to personalize a service for them. Because our face-to-face services are personalized, because you sit down with someone, you explain your situation, and they say, you know, having heard what you've told me, I recommend the following. What we can't do right now is provide a similar level of personalized service online without a human. So that's the bit that we think is the biggest opportunity area.
Yeah, I just wondered about that. Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks, Pat. Harriet on chat had a question. So she's asking, can I just clarify that you mean the customer satisfaction rating tool on your pages was how you built evaluation into services and used it?
That's part of it. So we use the customer, like the, did you find this helpful, kind of yes, no score. We use that as part of our quality work. So assessing whether existing content is of good quality. What I was more talking about in this was traffic and traffic to the websites, and what pages people were searching for, and what people were reading, and how long they were spending on that page. So it's more that Google Analytics type data.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, if people are thinking about how you implement that, the tool we've mentioned previously is Hotjar. There's quite a few different solutions that are like that out there, but Hotjar's got a really nice, like, so you can do like scales ratings. So like, how useful was the furlough page to you today? And you could rate like 1 to 5 on a scale of how useful it is. Or you can just do a simple thumbs up, some thumbs down if you want people to click very quickly. Or like they have like smiley face kind of rating systems, and it's just not intrusive. And people tend to be more likely to click it than fill out like a pop-up survey where you're asking too much and expecting too much of someone. So Hotjar is a way that you can get that level of insight. And just remember as well, Hotjar is free if you're a registered charity. So that's worth looking at. Right. Any interesting ones you've seen in the chat, Maddie, that you want to pull out?
Yeah, Nicola's just posted a question. In the chat there, Nicola, you've asked, with just one person looking at everything from delivery of programme to funder evaluations and writing applications, how would you suggest learning how to analyse Google Analytics?
That is a big job for one person. I don't envy you. Well, just personally speaking, I taught myself how to use basic Google Analytics with all the free tutorials that they have on the internet. And to be honest, I haven't had to, in my role, I haven't had to go much further beyond the basics of Google Analytics, and that didn't require any technical skills at all. Obviously, if you want to do more complex things or measure things which aren't typically measured, then you would have to learn how to build that in, and there's the capability to do that. I mean, I just want to also say, I saw a comment in there from Harriet about traffic as evaluation. I think what I'd also say on that one is we have much better data on our other channels. So when you speak to us on the phone, for example, we do really robust follow-up surveys with about 5% of everyone we speak to, which is in the millions. And in those surveys, we get really good insight on the quality of advice that was given. So our online channels, we actually have the least amount of information on that stuff. So again, what we want to do is bring our evaluation, I guess, quality up to the same level for online as it is for phone and other means.
Brilliant, thank you. There was an interesting one actually came in from Rob there. Rob, you can unmute yourself and ask if you want.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, that's great, Kylie. Thank you. I was just wanted to ask that I work with bits and pieces of lots of smaller charities who don't have the big data volume that you have, particularly for charities like Age UK's who've been traditionally face-to-face, and they've sort of been pushed online as you have, but now they're delivering a lot of services remotely, but they don't have the opportunity to gather data. And I just wondered if there was somewhere that such charities could look at your trends. Basically, you were saying that you publish your data. Is there somewhere they could find that to sort of see? It strikes me that, again, just taking Age UK as an example, that the things that you sort of predict are the things that are going to come up in like their befriending caseload. You know, the things that people worry about, that would be a really helpful thing for them to get a bit of a head start on, rather than just reacting to it.
Definitely. As you were speaking, I was just digging out the link, so I'll put that in the chat now.
Oh, brilliant, thank you.
Amazing, that's great. Okay, Nissa, do you want to, you can ask your one if you want to unmute.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating because you're a national body and you've got all the local offices and you've got all the website data. I just wonder if you've done anything like clever, or if you were thinking about how to look at any regional variations in advice seeking or issues that people are being faced, which is probably quite topical at the moment.
Yeah, we do have a lot of insight on that, actually, and I think you'll find some of it in the reports I just linked to. I mean, I think the most common regional differences we look at are urban versus rural, and London versus not London, which are the kind of obvious ones. And we use those in different ways, particularly when we're commissioning new services, because often some of our services are commissioned on a regional level. So, for example, Devon and Cornwall have like their own contract for a bunch of services, and we're able to hone in on those areas specifically. It's not 100% accurate when it comes to web traffic because, you know, IP addresses aren't always reliable, but we know roughly, and we can do regional assessment. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you, Kylie. I think what we'll do, we'll move on to next speakers, but Kylie needs to finish at about 3, needs to leave us, but if Kylie's still about, there's other ones that you want to ask, pop them in the chat and we can pick them up, hopefully.
Sure.
So I'm going to hand over to Nissa Ramsay now. I've also just put a link actually, so the piece of research that Nissa just did with the Catalyst on charity digital journeys, which is really useful. So if you're interested in that, go and have a look at that piece of research. So Nissa has stepped in at the last minute, which is amazing. So Nissa is the founder of Think Social Tech and is going to be talking about kind of key principles that should be underpinning your approach to evaluation and research. So I'll hand over to Nissa just now.
Oh, thanks very much for inviting me. Yeah, I was asked to talk at this about a month ago, but I had my head down in that big report that you'll see a link to on there. Was trying to busy publish that, so I wasn't able to kind of get my head around talking to you all. But once I heard this week, I was definitely really excited to have this conversation with everyone, because I'm really passionate about evaluating services well, and it's really hard to do well, and I love that other people work on this. I'm a freelance research and evaluator, and I tend to help people at the shaping stage. And I think what's been really interesting over the last 10 years is to see the shift towards digital services, which I love working on, but actually evaluation's a little bit further behind. I think we're playing catch up. So I'm just going to talk to you a bit about some principles which I think are important, whether you're designing or delivering an evaluation yourself, or if you're commissioning evaluation, and like right at the start of when you're thinking how we're going to develop this service. So yeah, I think that's the first big secret, is that you're not missing anything. No one is particularly amazing at this. It was great to hear from Kylie just now, because actually a lot of what she talked about resonate with some of the things I'm going to say as well. We're all trying to figure out the best way to use these different methods of delivering digital and the different types of data we have, and we're all new to this. And I think there's 2 reasons why we're playing catch up. The first is evaluators like myself, we didn't train in digital, we trained in social research. We didn't learn about analytics until a year or so ago, and even then we're still not quite up to speed on them. We're kind of picking up new skills as well. We weren't digital by default by any stretch of the imagination. And also the purpose of evaluation just hasn't really changed. So there's lots of clever ways to use data, just like Kylie shared, and I'm sure the next speaker will as well, to inform how you develop and deliver your services. But actually, a lot of the reasons why some of us will evaluate our services are still for funders, or to get funding, or to use our impact reports, talk to trustees. And that means that we still have to kind of bring 2 different worlds together when we're thinking about digital evaluation. So I made up some principles, which I kind of have always in the back of my mind, just based on being involved in a lot of digital service development and research, which I'll talk to you now. So these aren't principles that are published on a website, or I can share a fancy report to, or that anyone's validated. These are just things I think. And the first is what really annoys me about trying to apply traditional evaluation methods to digital services is start with what your service actually does. And I say that for a really important reason. and go back to your theory of change later. The problem is when we design an evaluation, typically we tend to start with our theory of change. Why did we do it? What's our theory? What are the outcomes we're trying to create? And that can tie us in a lot of knots when we're evaluating a digital service. So we might be trying to improve someone's mental health or make them feel safer or calmer, but actually the digital service is often a bit of a step below that. It might be helping someone find the advice they needed at that moment in time, or it might be trying to prepare for a doctor's appointment. And I think theory of change often gets us very confused with lots of grand big language that then get us kind of trying to ask people lots of questions that don't feel very relevant when they're using a very specific digital service, which will often do one thing very well rather than take them the whole journey. So always start with what the actual service does. And for those of you who are new to evaluation, which I'm also finding a lot of charities are not only developing digital services for the first time, they're doing evaluation for the first time. It would actually really help to learn about traditional evaluation approaches. I've got some links I can share in the chat, but understanding a bit more about theory of change development, setting outcomes, designing good surveys, designing good interviews. These are also really relevant things to learn about so that you can then put them to one side and work out how to do your own digital service evaluation well. And the best place to go are the NPC's website, Inspiring Impact. NCVO has lots of resources that you can learn about all of those things. The other principle I really like to think about when doing an evaluation, which is slightly different when it's a digital service, is it's a patchwork job. It's a make, do and mend piece. I think when we have a face-to-face service and it's all very planned and we know exactly who's going to be coming or the types of people that will be coming, the types of services they'll get, how that session will pan out, we'll be able to have that contact with them. You can then add a layer on top where you say, right, this is our evaluation, we'll deliver it in these ways, these are our methods, this is exactly who'll respond, this is kind of what they'll say and how we'll analyze the data. With digital evaluation, you might not ever meet that person. You might not know how many times they've interacted with you. There's just a lot of anonymity around it. You have to do things like figure out how to use a bit of Google Analytics and a bit of a pop-up survey and some ratings on some pages, and you sort of put it together in this patchwork job. So I think the skill in a good digital evaluation is being confident with that lack of certainty. And it will feel like a lack of a plan, but actually, if you have thought about it, that is really the only keys to success. And what other examples did I have? I'll come back to those points later. I think my third principle is that good evaluation design should really be thought about in the same way as good service design. So the other big mistake we can all make, and I'm really guilty of this, I really don't, please don't look back at any of my old surveys. When we do an evaluation, we still like to add it on to the end of things. So we want someone to like finish using a tool or a session and we want them to fill in our survey, and our survey will be horrible because it will be long and have lots of categories and not open well on mobile and detract from what people are trying to do, which is move on with their lives or get on to the next task. So actually there's a lot that you can learn from thinking about what are the principles of good service design. And I quite like to go old school on this and look at the GDS principles, and there's some that I think really resonate with good evaluation, one of which is do less. So a good digital evaluation does as little as possible. It's really tempting, especially as soon as you have something like a survey, which is really amenable to a digital format, to then ask lots and lots and lots of questions. But actually, the less you can ask, the better. And I think the best example I had of this recently was I was working with some of the Catalyst team on the service recipes, and we were talking about evaluation. I was like, I think we need to ask, like, we'll keep it really simple. We'll just ask 3 questions. People can say, you know, what did they find helpful? What didn't they like? What could they improve? And then they came back to me and challenged me and they said, we're just going to say, do you have any feedback? What is it? Which blew my mind. I was like, oh, okay, you have clever, the digital people, so they had clever ways they could analyze that data. And I was like, what do you mean you're not going to code it and ask it in these 3 different ways? And they have managed to use that. So doing less and can be really valuable, and doing the hard work to make it simple. I really can't, it's really easy to criticize surveys. There's one that's open at the moment that was going around that I looked at last night, and I'm not going to share it because it's too mean. But there's a charity doing a survey of their services right now, and I read it, and there's 100 different categories and 100 different ratings. And I don't know if you've ever heard of a Likert scale, when you have strongly agree to strongly disagree. There's 5 points for every single question and 20 different categories for each. I think it's a nightmare for people to fill in. And actually, I think a skill in terms of designing an evaluation, whether you're doing it or whether someone else in your team is doing it, or whether you've paid a fancy consultant or an average consultant like myself to do it, is just to be really, really confident to go to them and say, no, I'm not asking these questions, or that's wrong, or why. Ask why, really ask why for every single thing. How we need it, why are we asking it, do we need this many categories? And actually, if you do sign up to any of the tools like SurveyMonkey, for example, that gives you really useful guidance and says, they've actually done studies, and it'll flag up which questions you've done wrong. You've got 20 different questions, subcategories within this question. Is that really the right way to get everyone to complete it? And things like, could you choose 3 responses instead of 5? These are all really important, because as much as you can get bogged down in the inane detail of it all, it really affects people's experience of completing it. And I think that's the other, I've lost the list of principles now, I should have them memorized somewhere. But the other thing is, really think about the context. That's really important with digital evaluation, the context in which people are completing a task for you, whether it's upvoting a page or filling in a survey, taking part in an interview. It's really, really important that you're not then pissing them off, for want of a better word. Or maybe your service has some issues in itself, nothing's perfect first time. If there's a dead end in your service and people can't get what they want, and then they see an evaluation survey or a way to get in touch with you, then you get all these queries being help me, I need this information now, I had that a few times, or this is really annoying, I want to complain. And so you need to make sure there's no dead ends. People can't just come through an evaluation route as a way to get to your organization, and that needs to be thought about in your service design as well as your evaluation design. And I think, and it annoys people if they're getting asked questions about services they haven't had. And so if you're saying, has this improved your mental health? And you're like, well, all I did was go on here to look up some information for a friend. Why would it improve my mental health? You have to kind of think about all the different kind of variations and formats. So any piloting you can do or any testing will be really helpful. And if you could do any kind of qualitative research with the people who use the service before doing any mass kind of questioning of people or lots of interviews, that will really, really help as well. Just because how people talk about why things are valuable to them are often quite different to how evaluators like to ask questions about why it's important to them. So it will really kind of improve the success rate of any evaluation that you do. And the other thing that's really important is, it's very easy in a digital context to think, actually, we'll just ask everyone. Let's ask everyone everything we want to know. And you've actually got an opportunity here to be quite clever. So could you just ask a sample of 5% of people all of your questions, or could you divide it up and just ask some cohorts some questions and some or other, or could you just do it for 3 weeks rather than the whole year? Those can all be really valid approaches of doing evaluation to help you learn, is my service effective? Are people finding the information they need? Is it kind of helping them do what we hoped it would do? And to wrap up, I think my top advice would be question your funders. If you're doing an evaluation for a funder, basically, or to get funding, and you know that they're particularly interested in understanding certain outcomes, really go back to them. I worked with a charity recently who had received a large grant from a very well-known funder as part of a program that had stipulated certain outcomes, and they had a program evaluation, and they'd been asked to capture all this information about the people they worked with, and they were going to build this into an app that people went on to get basic articles and guidance about going to school, and about, you know, teenage worries. And then they were being asked to kind of evaluate, to kind of respond to questions like, are you going to A&E? And do you feel part of a community? And actually having the confidence to go back to funders and be like, this is just not relevant. It might be for the kind of counselling services or face-to-face work that you funded, but it's not here. Like, that's really helpful to know that you can do, and you can push back on that. And question your evaluators, because they won't know what you know, and they won't know about the design, they won't know about the users. They just know about good evaluation, but actually they might also not know about good digital practice, 'cause it's quite rare to find someone who can do both. So question your evaluators, they'll appreciate it long term. And question yourself. Just because you're excited and want to know everything about your service doesn't mean you should or you can. And I think that's it, really. And so in summary, I think you actually don't really need to be a good expert digital evaluator to do this well. You just need to be very thoughtful and put a bit of time. Get everyone who's excited about pushing out digital services and products and getting on with it. Like, encouraging everyone to pause is probably another big challenge you need to overcome, but really having time to think about what you're doing and how you're doing it will really help. And I have a load of links I'm about to post in the chat in case it's helpful. Sorry if that was a bit waffly or a bit vague. Happy to try and provide some specifics if it's
that was
useful.
So useful, really useful. Yeah. And you know, actually, I think even if people take just like one element of that away, like the stuff in surveys is like how many charities, and not through necessarily any fault of their own, sometimes they're funders' fault or sometimes a legacy of how evaluations have been structured, like how much is underpinned by a SurveyMonkey. Like how many big decisions are being taken about people's lives and the services they get because of the way a SurveyMonkey is structured. Like literally we're using it to design services. And like when you take a step back and you think about that, it's utterly ridiculous. But if that's all you've been doing for years, whether it's paper-based and now you've stuck it in a SurveyMonkey, is irrelevant. But just asking questions, particularly things like what will people do, like which you touched on, is like the idea that I can answer a question about what I may theoretically do in the future or how my mental health has been improved when I've only just come off a web page is obviously ridiculous when you think about it, but we're into these kind of frameworks that we get bogged down in. I thought it was really useful, Nissa. I thought it was incredibly useful. Any questions for Nissa? Were there any coming in chat, Maddie, as well? Just say as well, Kylie put a really interesting link about the KPIs they're using, so that's gone in the chat as well in case you missed that. Anyone want to ask us a question? Pat, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really good. Can I ask, because I'm not very tech savvy, if I'm filling in and I fill in lots of consumer questionnaires, but there's information I think is not relevant and I don't want to answer it, you can't actually go on and complete the whole survey, can you? Often. So I just dump it all and then I write a little note to whoever it is and give them my feedback in that format. I usually write to the top of the organization and give it to them. Does that make sense?
That happens so often. Yep. Always think about things like forcing answers is bad practice sometimes, because lots of people like to look through surveys before they do them. Some people will find a question that is not relevant to them and will just drop off, or they will just fill it in and tick anything, which is equally really unhelpful. And you just don't want to frustrate and lose people, basically, even though you've just gone, oh, fine, I won't complete it. Then you're like, that was a bit annoying that I've wasted my time. And you don't want people to feel like that about your organization, that you're wasting their time. So yeah, absolutely. I hate forced questions. The only really real reason you can justify it is if you know you're asking the same survey to two very different groups of people and you have a filter, but I would really keep them to a minimum.
Thank you.
Suraj put a really good link in about evaluation of digital services. And just 4 simple questions to drive validated learning. But that point of that is more in the context of iterative testing and learning, rather than it's a thing to validate that we do at the end of something. I think that's a really important point. And actually, just like going on that point that Pat said, like if you can ask people small incremental questions over a period of time, it's going to yield better results than you ask a 17 question survey at the end of 12 months that nobody wants to fill in. And again, I think more and more funders are getting savvy to the fact that you're asking them for £120,000 for a project. And then when I assess the grant and I look at it, I go, oh, you had a survey monkey and 17 people responded to it. And now you want how much money? And so really thinking about what are the questions your funders are going to be asking over the next year, now that service design underpins a lot of the way that they're thinking, and actually really unrobust, is unrobust a way of, let's go with it, unrobust surveys are probably not a good way to try and convince a funder to give you money. So even if you only think about it in that context, I think for me, that's a really important thing. Right, Nick, good question from Nicola. I don't know if you want to pick up that one. Is there a critical number of survey responses below which is not worthwhile using?
I thought you were just going to pick that one up, Ross.
No. I don't have an answer to it, that's why.
No, I don't. It's quite, yeah, I mean, if you're under 10, it's pretty shoddy. But other than that, it's like, it kind of depends how many people are using your service and what you're surveying for. Yeah, so I developed a survey this week for everyone who took a training, kind of like a training course for the Catalyst, what are they called, discovery grants programs. We've just been supporting 10 charities through a discovery process, and it's basically a course, you know, how good do you feel better able to conduct user research and design a digital service based on that. And it's so easy to think, okay, now I need to ask about every single element of the course content because that's what we said we would report on, but it wasn't needed, so we've decided not to go ahead with it. But actually, if all 10, I would have expected all 10 people to complete that, and actually if all 10 did, that would be a perfectly good kind of feedback survey. But equally, if I worked with a charity that had kind of 300 users and only got 10 people filling in a survey, I don't think I'd be that happy with that response. So yeah, it's sort of based on how many people you ask. And like you said, if you're basing a kind of decision for 170k on 17 survey responses, that doesn't sound great either.
Yeah,
I really love 50 as a number, but it's just, I've just made that up.
We just tell everyone it's all got to be 50. If you do under 50, it's useless. It's not even valid now.
I'm gonna just butt in there and say, Susan Money's asked about it because it links to what you're talking about. In terms of volumes of responses, do you notice a big difference between people who respond to digital versus non-digital surveys?
That's a good question.
But then I'm gonna tag on to that. Sorry, Susan, just what you said, like, is that, you know, the golden number, as you said, Nissa, for you is 50. Would that work for digital and non-digital as well, or is there a difference?
Sometimes you can combine them as well. You need to think about your audience, like who's filling these in. And to be honest, I tend to interview charities about digital topics who are already involved in digital. So I'd expect people to fill it in online naturally. But actually, if a lot of your group that you're conducting an evaluation with aren't really online and wouldn't have used many other digital services, it doesn't make sense to email them a link to a survey, It would make more sense to kind of send them something. Whether you could think, today we could still, postcards are just as valid, letters, sending it to people's emails, ringing them. When I did a piece of research a few years ago, we wanted to contact survivors of abuse who were in kind of closed Facebook groups. So obviously, like, really important not to be identified, and important to be inclusive as well, and not just expect everyone to have a Twitter account and be on Twitter and sharing things and kind of other usual practices that we'd follow. And Chain was the organisation leading that part of the research at the time, and we decided that they would ask the survey questions we developed, but each as a set of individual Facebook polls each week. So obviously we didn't have anything like one person thought this, but the next week they said something like this. We didn't do any of that kind of approach, but we did manage to get the responses to each question. But it was really nice as well because everyone could then edit the responses to the Facebook poll to make it more meaningful and upvote different kind of things that were important. So it gave us so many insights we weren't expecting. Trickier to manage as a kind of traditional evaluation approach, but it was a nice thing to try.
So Nicola's going to come in, and then we've got Debbie's going to come in because we had a question from her that's been sitting in the chat for a while, and then Nicola's going to come in. And then what we're going to do, we're going to have a Q&A at the end with all the speakers who are left. Kylie will need to leave at that point anyway, and then they'll get a chance to ask any more questions that you've got from us at that point. So Debbie's one, it probably falls on from what you were just talking there. It was about matching the tool you use with the audience you're trying to reach, which I thought was actually quite important. So any thoughts on that, Nissa? Oh, Nissa's frozen.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm frozen. I lost my train of thought. I was reading the comment, but love it.
You were just physically frozen, not
yeah, I was just physically frozen. I was thinking like another really important approach is to think, does it have to be an add-on? Does it have to be a separate tool? Could you build in your evaluation to your delivery? So Laura Finn and Cohen said their online service is informal online chat. So is there anything within that chat that you could collect evaluation data, which you could do in person? So you could do kind of hands up, or there's a tool called Mentimeter that some people use, or Kahoot is an online quiz. And all of these different tools where people give feedback or interact as part of a session can still capture evaluation data, just like it would if you were running an in-person session and you could get people to stand at different sides of the room. Or I don't know, evaluations with kids often have things like putting beanbags in buckets or smiley faces on walls. Like all of these kind of tools are still available. You just need to think a bit more creatively about how to use them in this type of session. Yeah, this, I don't know, Ross is good at the old stickers there. Lots of people are good at those. That's another technique you could use. The key is to have a kind of reason for doing it. So you've thought about your question, you've thought about the response, you've checked they can actually do it, and then you have a way of counting that up and recording it.
Yeah.
But even then, you don't even have to do it, because you can record sessions as long as you have consent and you've got that process in place, and then kind of work out what everyone said and how they responded later, and add that up and use it in reports.
I think that there's almost a rush that these things have to be really formal, and then as soon as we have that mindset, it's like we think this is the way that a survey needs to look, but actually injecting some amount of fun or it being part of a service delivery is much more likely to yield people taking part in it. Nicola, do you want to come and ask your question?
Yeah, it was, thanks. It was just kind of backing up my question about the number of people filling in a survey, because actually what we've done this year is taken an event that normally happens with lots of people filling in surveys in places, and instead taken the survey online, and so the number is massively different. You know, it's way smaller, the number of people filling in evaluation forms online, compared to if you have people in places saying, please can you fill in this this feedback form. So that's kind of where my question came from about, you know, the validity or the kind of usefulness of the amount of information that you get from a much smaller pool of questionnaires.
You need to make sure in those surveys you have a way to capture if there's any key groupings of people who are responding and not, because it might be that you're missing a key age group or a key type of service user, or how engaged they are with you, and that might be, so your survey might still be really useful, but you just need to sense check, are we only getting feedback from a certain cohort of people? 80% response is really a 20% response rate, 80% non-response is really typical for surveys generally. And it sounds to me like you might have to go old school and call people.
It's something that we kind of can't look at who attended. It was an open thing, so I don't think we can reach visitors. But what it's interesting, because we always find that it's women fill in the forms, and women of a certain age fill in forms. So
it's really important you find a way to capture the views of those who are not those people.
Yeah. Okay.
Was it an online session? Sorry, did you say?
Yeah. So we it's a thing that normally, you know, people attend in person, and because of this year's restrictions, we took it online. So it's a pilot year. So it's kind of okay that a lot of our evaluation has not been filled in that way, because that just shows that you need to do it in person.
Yeah, or you could kind of find, if you do the online event again, which is highly likely that could happen, you could find a way to kind of build some kind of group. Some part of that session will need to be dedicated towards like some kind of pretend fun interactive activity that is useful and relevant, that helps you draw out some of that information.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Okay, just a wee round of applause as well for Nissa's session. That was super useful. It was really useful. We're going to hand over now to our final speakers. So we've got a double act for our last one. So we've got Nicola Pay, who's Communications and Marketing Manager with Starcatchers, and Heather Armstrong, who's Creative Skills Manager with the charity. In case you don't know about Starcatchers, they're Scotland's national arts and early years organisation, but I'm sure they'll tell you a wee bit more about the organisation just now. So Nicola, I think you're going first, aren't you?
Yes. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so thanks for inviting us. I'm Starcatchers Communications Manager, and I'm here with Heather Armstrong, who she'll talk specifically about a programme that she runs at Starcatchers. So first of all, I'll tell you a bit about Starcatchers. Yeah, as Ross said, we're Scotland's national arts and early years organisation. We work with amazing artists to inspire babies and young children up to the age of 5 through live theatre, dance, music. And our artists also work in communities with young children and families. So they offer regular creative play-based sessions that give parents or carers and their little ones an opportunity to have to do fun creative activities together. And consistently our evaluation shows that this helps strengthen adult-child bonds. Starcatchers also works with early years professionals through our creative skills programme that Heather will talk about. So the thread that weaves through all of that work is that it's all face-to-face engagement. Live performance is incredible. Working face-to-face with children and families enables community artists to connect really deeply and to be responsive. But of course, in March, it all had to stop. But before I talk about how we shifted to digital, I'll just give you a very brief overview of how we have evaluated our social impact, the social impact of our projects for the past couple of years, I believe. So Starcatchers uses the matter of focus approach. It's outcomes focused. So for our projects, we define the outcomes and impacts that are most important. What we're setting out to do, how participants feel, what they gain and what they learn. And then the team gathers data, evidence and feedback to build a picture of the difference that we're making. So we'll collect participant numbers, but in the moment feedback from a parent, for example, or an artist's observation in a moment of how engaged a child is just as important, if not more important. So back to March 2020, for Expecting Something, which is one of our community engagement projects, which provides art sessions for young parents and their babies. The priority was to maintain regular contact with those parents. They were already a close-knit group, and they already had a private Facebook group. So the artists prepared and delivered sessions live online. In terms of evaluating the effectiveness and the impact of those sessions, it didn't actually, I don't think it really needed to deviate much from the existing methods, because the numbers involved were relatively small, and there was an existing relationship there. Probably the biggest shift for Starcatchers was the introduction towards the end of March of We Inspirations. So literally everything had changed except, of course, our core mission, which was to inspire babies and young children through the arts. At that point, almost all babies and young children were at home with their parents, and many of those parents were having a really tough time. So we introduced We Inspirations as an online resource, and they're idea cards to provide simple, fun, creative ideas to engage your little one at home. And they're actually the brainchild of Heather. They reside on our website. We drafted in a web designer to create a more user-friendly page layout to accommodate them. And they were shared across our social media channels twice a week, twice weekly, same day, pretty much the same time, right through until the end of August, I believe. Gradually, they were picked up and shared by other organisations, including the BBC and occasionally the Scottish Government's Parent Club. In terms of evaluation, we made good use of analytics. So website visitor numbers shot up immediately, with about 50% of people going directly to the We Inspirations page. In March, we saw a 60% increase on February's visitor numbers, and then in April, a 230% increase on February's numbers. So for context, our website visitor numbers always shoot up when we have a show running, like a production, and we're actively marketing to generate ticket sales. But in April 2020, visitor numbers were still about 50% higher by comparison. And the number of new followers and likes on our social media channels were also increasing significantly. It was the depth of engagement among nurseries, particularly on Twitter, though, that was so fantastic. So at that time, the nurseries were either providing services for key workers or supporting learning at home. And early year staff were sharing, they were commenting, they were letting us know that they were sharing these ideas, these idea cards with their parents. And when they actually started sharing pictures of actual children, some of the children, I think, who were coming to the nurseries, you know, when there were hubs, if their parents were key workers, sometimes they'd share pictures on Twitter of the children using, you know, doing a wee inspiration activity. You know, we did a little dance. And then when a parent took the time to share on social media how positively a little one had responded and how much fun they'd had, it like genuinely brought a tear to our eyes. But those were fairly few and far between. So I think the biggest difference for us in terms of evaluating our impact through this particular digital project was our aim was still to inspire creative play and interactions between parents and little ones, but the questions that we were asking ourselves through our outcome, like, you know, what are children gaining from this? What are the families doing differently as a result? What difference are we making? They were more difficult to answer. But going forward, I think the connections that we've made as a result will make doing surveys and case studies possible. And we're also looking to make some changes at the point that people interact with the resource like Inspirations on the website. So like a call for action, which I think people have already spoken about, asking people to tell us a bit more about their intentions and why they're there. And for us in the grand scheme, it's still very early days in terms of us using digital engagement in this way. There's no doubt we'll continue to develop it, but while still remaining committed to face-to-face engagement. And I'll pass over to Heather now, who will tell you about our creative skills program, which is now called Creative Skills Online.
Thanks for that, Nick. I was actually a wee bit emotional listening to that. I'm sure it's a journey that a lot of people have been on, kind of one version or another in the past few months. But I'll pull myself together, shall I? So I thought it would be useful to tell you just really quickly about what Creative Skills was for the first 6 years and how we evaluated it, and then how we've changed it to online provision. So for the first 6 years of delivery, it was a programme of 10 sessions of practical arts training. It was all about being face-to-face. It was all about the same people attending all 10 sessions and becoming a group, forming relationships, reflecting on their practice, growing as people. We had several groups that could have formed their own WhatsApp and then are still in touch years later. Very much about, you know, personal growth, although that personal growth was then used within people's work. So the main aim was always about to increase the skills and confidence of the workforce so that they would use arts and creativity more often and more regularly within their practice. So we used to evaluate using SurveyMonkey, but printed off SurveyMonkey. As you might imagine, if you work in a nursery or a family centre, you're not sitting at a computer all day, you're doing the absolute opposite. It's not a workforce that has high digital literacy at all. We did try, but in my kind of first years, in my naivety, I would email out baselines before we started, and I just would never get a response. It would just never happen. So we would print it out. We'd do a baseline questionnaire at the start. At the end of 10 weeks, we would do an evaluation, asking roughly the same questions to see what had changed. some of that was about kind of tick boxes, kind of strongly agree, strongly disagree. Some of that was give people the chance to kind of give more, kind of write their own answers and things like that. And that was, I guess, was the kind of the quantitative, the stuff that we could put into nice statistics, and we had some brilliant statistics from that. Kind of like over 90% consistently in terms of people increasing their confidence and skills and all that kind of thing. So that was kind of lovely. Also, a big part of what we did was looking for case studies. The training would be run by different freelance artists as well as myself. So I would ask everybody who engaged with any of our participants to keep an eye out for what I called quote gold, because often you get feedback in a very informal way. And, we would have development sessions, people are always saying such and such. And I'm like, well, you need to write it down. You need to keep track of it. You as you get to know a workforce, as you get to know a set of participants, you get that feedback all the time. And so one of the things I try to instill into everybody I work with is, well, actually, we need to be open to feedback all the time, both positive and negative. But it's not just about that survey. We would also, as we formed relationships, we would look to see which settings were taking back the ideas from the sessions, were really embedding them into practice, and we would work up case studies. This is all funded by the Scottish Government, and we've had some really supportive contacts there over the years. And as things kind of shift slightly, sometimes I say, well, minister loves a statistic or minister loves a story. Actually, probably people love both. They love to see the black and white of that, this and that, of 90% said this, but actually it can be a story about how this has really impacted a 2-year-old and the way that they've changed and communicated, that can make a massive difference as well. And then we would also keep an eye on social media as well, in terms of, we would still share ideas and, get kind of feedback and stuff like that. And finally, I would also I would kind of build and maintain relationships with the local authorities. So kind of people who would know how the training was being implemented in lots of different settings. So again, it was, I guess, always trying to have this kind of like spider web to see, well, actually, how can we get the fuller picture? How can we not just have this questionnaire and that's the end of it? Oh, and the final thing we would do is that 6 months after training, and then like a year down the line, we would send out a survey monkey looking at long-term impact, looking at what had happened when people had started to use. And we didn't get massive numbers of returns on that. I think that kind of like 20% thing, I think I would be probably, we'd probably be grateful if we did do that. But what we did tended to be people who were more, who really invested and who really had used the skills and the confidence that they'd gained over the years. So that gave us a lovely insight into the impact that it could have, that could do. Then COVID happened, and no one was ever allowed to be in a room together ever again. I think pretty early on, I recognised that, we could have just moved it so that we just had 10 Zoom sessions that everybody had to kind of come along to. I realised pretty quickly that that was a terrible idea. 10 sessions is a big commitment anyway. And I think it's different when you're turning up each week and you're getting to interact with peers and you're gaining really practical skills, and it was always really good fun. But I thought, actually, I'm not convinced that either in terms of time or that emotionally, or even in terms of practicality. Who knows, Dana, you know what you're doing in 10 weeks time? Because I don't. Who knows what new restrictions are going to be in place? Who knows whether you're going to be home learning or whatever? So I redesigned the programme so that actually a lot more of it was about digital content, and then we would still have an element of live. So the inspirations cards that Nick was talking about, we kept them, and we're still using them, and we're still developing them. The kind of the flow chart now is that every month we record a podcast with a different artist, where I chat to them in quite an informal way about ideas that they have for working with wee ones and why it's important. And then the podcast software that we use will then give us numbers of kind of downloads, and they also give us an idea of like geographically who's listening to what. Although we're really glad to share our content with anybody, obviously the Scottish Government would quite like it if it's people in Scotland who are benefiting from the information. So we dig into the kind of geographical information there. There's reflective practice worksheets that you can download that goes with every podcast, and that's if you want to either dig into some of the ideas in the podcast yourself, or you can use it as a format to then run a session with your colleagues. We've still got the ideas cards. We've made videos of the ideas. And then finally, we have live Zoom sessions as well. So a couple of times a month, the same artist who did the podcast then hosts a couple of live sessions where we do go through some practical stuff on screen and interact. The Zoom sessions are obviously when we get to talk to real people face to face. We also realise that actually people aren't going to want to answer hundreds of questions. Because they're there, often, we've got an hour and a half. That's quite a long time to look at. So they don't want to get to the end and have to answer loads and loads of questions. So we distilled it down to one question, which is right back to, I think, what Nissa was talking about. And that's like, what is it you do? What is it you're trying to do? And we distilled it right back to, well, we're trying to improve people's skills and confidence in the arts. And so that's what we ask at the end of the session. Do you feel that you've gained skills and ideas that you can use in your practice? And it's from that strongly agree to strongly disagree. And so we can gather that information. Obviously, we're gathering information in terms of who's downloading what, or rather how many downloads there are, traffic to different pages on the website, in terms of how often each of our resources are getting looked at. We're looking at social media in terms of how, like, the impact of different things, and we've kind of tweaked it over the last wee while in terms of, we realize that actually videos, if we kind of embedded them in a certain way, then they wouldn't necessarily get a lot of views, but if we shared them at different times of day or in different ways, so that it's very much a movable feast in terms of really looking at the data every kind of, well, Nick was like that every day, and I was like, but every day, every couple of days, and saying, well, actually, is this, in terms of social media, how is this going on? How is this working on Twitter? How is this working on Facebook? How is that translating to people coming to the website? Are there ways that we can make that more streamlined? And the other thing that we do still use SurveyMonkey. We still have a kind of a monthly tell us about it. Tell us about what you've been using. We've tried to keep it to, I think it's about 5 questions, because we don't want to overload people. And we've put a wee extra carrot, or we've got a prize draw each month, and it's £50 of art materials that goes to your setting. So nobody's going to get rich off it. It just means that, but there is that little extra carrot so that people can kind of fill that in. And we've embedded that wherever we can. So we've embedded that in the reflective practice sheets. If you download it, it's like, give us feedback. We've embedded it into the transcript of the podcast. So if you want to kind of read along, it's like, give us feedback. We tweet it regularly. We share it at the end of our Zoom sessions. And usually what I try and say is that, well, look, here's the link. Just click it just now so it's in your browser, and fill it out when you can. Yeah, and again, all the things I was talking about before about relationships and trying to like pick up those informal bits of feedback, we're still trying to do that. We're still trying to maintain the relationships, and we're still trying to be kind of as open and as chatty as possible, because we recognize that actually yes, people will fill out forms if you hammer them enough, but often it is that kind of like informal feedback, and when people feel the need to give you feedback, that's when you can sometimes get some of the most valuable information as well. I did run a focus group looking at kind of some of our kind of key contacts, got them all together, and this was still during lockdown, and one of them said just quite casually, she was just like, oh yeah, I share your ideas every week, I couldn't do without them, they're the backbone of my home learning. I'm just like, you've never liked a tweet. You've never shared it. It's just this idea of this kind of like phantom interaction. So I suppose that's something I would say, is that the digital stuff is marvelous, and I think we're doing the best we can in this situation. But I would also say that actually sometimes lifting the phone is one of the most valuable things you can do. And particularly if the job that you've done in the past has been about relationships and about kind of personal interaction, it's trying to keep that at your core.
That was really useful. Thank you, Heather. Thanks so much. There's some good links to Starcatcher stuff going in the chat, just in case you missed it. The resources are amazing. There's some really good stuff. I particularly like about the fact that, like, talking about evaluation, it's so many different touch points in what you do. I thought that was really, really important, a really good piece of takeaway advice for people. Any questions at all for Heather and Nicola? Nissa, did you have a question? I think you had a question. I don't know if it got answered or not.
I've no idea.
No
I
idea.
put quite a lot in the chat. I've
That's
probably lost track of it.
Where is it?
I love the approach. I like totally get where you're coming from. My nursery could not be any less digital if they possibly tried. They set up a Facebook group and they managed 3 different posts over lockdown. Yeah, you're right. They're just people who go in rooms. They don't spend any time on the computer. Oh, I did wonder, and you might know more about this, Ross, but when you print out surveys and give them kind of to people on pieces of paper, there probably is an app or software you can use to then automatically turn handwriting into text. It's probably rubbish.
Yeah, you get what's it called? Because it's OCRs, the technology. I can never remember what it stands for, but it's like the thing that can recognize handwriting, and then so you can so they use it for, if someone fills out a paper-based form, it automatically fills the form out on a database. Don't know what the tool would be for surveys, but yeah, the technology is called OCR. If someone knows what OCR stands for, put it in the chat, and I'll be really impressed. I remember at one point, ages ago, I got an OCR scanner, and in my head, I would like digitize all the paper crap that I had in the charity I worked for, and all I had was a very expensive scanner that sat on a desk, and I never put any paper through it. So yeah, I kind of think the more that you can keep stuff digital first, the easier your life's going to be, but that's not always possible with everything that you do. Rob's got not so much a question, but it would be nice to hear about the small data side of things from Nicola and Heather. Rob, do you want to quickly clarify?
Yeah, I just thought it was a nice sort of counterpoint to what Kylie shared at the start, that she's got sort of this huge reams and reams of data and numbers, and it's nice to kind of hear something about the other end of it, the sort of very qualitative, anecdotal, small end of it.
Heather or Nicola, do you want to pick that one up?
I mean, I think the only thing I would add, and I hope Nick would agree with this, is that as an organisation, we kind of see evaluation as everyone's job. So it's just about having those eyes and ears and hoping to recognise, oh, actually, that's really useful to know, and writing it down somewhere and kind of feeding it back.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is that this is everyone's role. Yeah, and how do you build that into everyone's role? And we're going to throw up questions for anyone, so Nissa, Heather, or Nicola. So if there's any questions at all for any of them, if you want to just unmute yourself and you can ask away. I'm going to pick up Debbie's one then from the chat, which was about people's experiences of using SMS surveys. That's a really good question. Anyone use them? My children are currently taking off wet socks in the background. That is a very wet pair of socks.
Yeah, I'm just asking because I've tried it and with not great success, but I do like that it's so it was with people who didn't have necessarily access to digital easily. So we were wondering, we're just wondering, and then you really have to consolidate your questions because you don't want to ask a lot of questions, so you're really consolidating it. But we still didn't have a great response, so I just wondered if anybody else had a go at it.
It's really interesting for charities running services with WhatsApp.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to suggest. If you look at like Manchester CAB, who were on one of our previous calls, and how they use Twilio, and so it's like kind of automates, so like it can be like, you know, as soon as someone interacts with a service and that service has come to an end, it automates an email, a SMS that goes straight to them, or a WhatsApp message, or a Facebook Messenger message, and then so you're kind of pushing surveys through. Because I think that's a big thing, is like having to remember to do the stuff can just be a huge, colossal job in itself, and it's like, how do you automate those workflows? I think we can put a link. There's a really good, actually, Manchester CAB did a blog post for SCVO about how they use Twilio. That's worth looking at. Okay. Any others? Any other questions? My children are now being like the noisiest people in the world. I do apologise. One of them now is carrying a chair across the room. What could possibly go wrong? Pat, do you want to come in?
The general question about how does one motivate people to kind of participate in digital surveys? What kind of might do that in some way?
Heather and Nicola, you talked a wee bit about incentives. Maybe pick that one up.
We did use, we've used prizes actually, haven't we? A couple of times. In fact, I think we've used it every time, so it's actually difficult to know whether we would have got, you know, less if we hadn't. But I can't remember what the rate was. I think it was about 20%, wasn't it, Heather?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So have you got any thoughts on incentives as well?
So I was just to say, I do think that having a relationship and a connection is really important, and that's what you know, through one of the most valuable things I think of the We Inspirations were the digital connections that we made as a result of it. And actually, so they're not just, you know, when the way that people were interacting with us digitally on Twitter, for example, these nurseries, they're now quite, you know, I think that they're going to lead to much deeper relationships, and so we would then we can follow up, I think, with them, and you know, through nurseries, you know, we may even then be able to sort of interact with parents and things like that, you know. So I think that having a relationship is still really important.
So was that like building a rapport and sort of building trust, which kind of links in then with people being motivated to give feedback?
Yeah, I mean, I think it absolutely, it's about that trust. It's about that when someone does give you feedback, you know, it's really nice to, if it's on social media or Twitter, it's like nice to retweet and go, oh my goodness, isn't this amazing? Aren't they doing such a great job? Which they are. I mean, it's a genuine reaction. It's not, there's nothing kind of forced in it, but to, you know, when people give you feedback to say, for us, you know, to see how they're using it, it's like, actually that's really important to us, but it's really important to them as well, to have that recognition, to say, well, actually it's fantastic what it is you're doing under sometimes quite difficult circumstances.
Yeah, it's really good advice. Yeah, yeah, and this is just kind of reinforcing that about saying thank you is really important. Yeah, it's a broader motivation techniques: prizes, begging, guilt, strong relationships, all of which can be effective depending on the audience. One of the things that I wanted to kind of pick up on a wee bit, and maybe slightly off on a tangent, is thinking about how you marry up good evaluation and good feedback, and how that could be published openly and how you can use that. And so, like, you classically see things on charity websites where it's like a service user in quotes talking about how amazing a service is. Often you can look at it and think a member of staff has sat down and coached and coaxed that out of the person, and it doesn't sound like an actual service user. And so one of the things that I'd like you to think about is not just how would you take this stuff and kind of squirrel it away in your own information systems, but how might that sit as a Facebook review or as a Google review or a LinkedIn recommendation if it's a professional. And so you're hitting those two things of getting good evaluation from someone, but it's been openly published. And the one that I like, I'm gonna try and find it and actually give a link to it, is the youth work charity Peak. So if you look at their Facebook page, I don't know how many 5-star reviews they've got now. So they've got 50 or 49 5-star reviews. And so basically, if you go on, and so if I'm a teacher working in the East End of Glasgow and I am searching for a specific type of youth work service or support service for a kid that I'm with, and someone mentions a bunch of names, because there's countless charities in Glasgow doing that kind of work, and I see the reviews that Peak have from parents, they're all from actual parents, it's really easy for me to take that next step of knowing who I'm going to engage with. And none of that is by chance. So Peak, when they get good feedback, will speak to a parent and say, that's great, so that other parents can understand the support that you've got and the difference it's made to your kids. Can you please go and leave that as a Facebook review? So that simple ask. Now, the other thing that that's helped them with is what they found is for search results for certain terms, so things like dads only toddlers group or football youth sessions free or East End of Glasgow tennis club that they run, they come up on the top of almost all the results for all those searches. Like, they leapfrog even some of the bigger youth work charities. And those reviews are one of the reasons that they do that, is Google's algorithm really favors positive review content. So for me, there's a big thing there about not just they're a nice fuzzy feeling or that it's going to help you develop services, but that's enough for someone to make a decision about connecting with you or donating to you or referring to you over one of the other organisations who might do a similar thing. Is anyone doing that at the moment? Is anyone using positive reviews in that way? No. Right. There's your task for next week. Is like everyone who said a nice thing about you recently, go and get them to leave a review. Okay. Anyone else? Nissa?
Isn't that what Good HQ was for? That SCVO made a few years ago. Wasn't that what that was?
Maybe. This has been recorded.
Maybe comms will edit that bit out.
Maybe they'll edit it out. But I mean, it's the same principle in the sense of, you know, you've got a positive review on Good HQ, and I'm like the charity regulator or a funder, and I read that, it helps strengthen my decision making in terms of what I'm thinking about your organisation. There's a really good one. I can't bloody find it on Peak's page, but there's an amazing one, and it's a woman whose son is deaf, and she's talking about the service that she got from Peak, and it's just astonishing when you read it and you get a real sense of the work that they do and the difference that they make. One of the other things that Peak have been really good about is like literally like screenshotting those reviews, and then when they go and present to Cora Foundation or Inspiring Scotland, they're like, look, here's what an actual parent is saying about the difference that we've made to their lives. And it's left by a parent. It's not like a member of staff has sat down and written it out for them. It's like someone's taking the time to do that off their own back. And it feels kind of authentic. Right, any final thoughts, Nissa, Heather or Nicola?
It's just a really lovely session to brainstorm and share ideas and challenges. Just suddenly feel like I'm really part of something, even though it's my first one.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's kind. I have found the review that I mentioned from the mum about her son who's deaf, so I've put it in the link in there so you can have a wee look at that and have a read through it. I think for me that review is more powerful than anything that charity could write on any kind of report. Heather or Nicola, any thoughts from you before we finish up?
No,
I don't know why I put people on the spot like this after they've just like given everything that they can possibly give, and I'm like, just tell me one final thing in a really vague and ambiguous way. If there's anything you want to say.
So thank you very much. It's been a really useful session, and there's lots for us to take away as well from the first two speakers, as well as the questions that have been asked and stuff. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting us.
No, it's been really useful. It's been amazing. It's been interesting to hear like the work that you guys have been doing, just some of those principles that underpin it, and then, like Nissa talking about the ways that you can do this stuff quickly, that it doesn't need to be something that you go and employ an external consultant to do. I think the thing that I quite like about Citizens Advice is, although they're a pretty colossal organisation, it's like the stuff that Kylie's talking about, anyone in this room can do most of that. Okay, right, we'll have the video on the SCVO YouTube channel. Our next one is for Trustees Week. So if you go into the SCVO events page, you'll get that. We've got John from Maddie's team at SCVO talking about his role as a digital trustee. We also have Chris Yu, who is a trustee with Enable Scotland. And Chris works for, so has Tony Blair changed the name of his charity? Because I noticed that he changed the name. Has he just removed Tony Blair's name for it? Anyway, Chris is a really nice man. Don't hold it against him that he works for Tony Blair. I don't particularly have anything against Tony Blair, but I can see loads of people going, I'll not be going to that one, right? But that, just ignore the fact that he works for Tony Blair. It will be a very good session, but when we're thinking about how do we get digital on the board agenda, that's what we're going to be looking at the next DigiShift call, which I think is the 6th of November. Is that right, Maddie? Cool, amazing. Right, thank you so much to our speakers. So thanks to Nissa, Heather, Nicola and Kylie. That was amazing. You were all fantastic. That was really good. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone.
I'll use your emoji reactions now, and it's not just me that uses them.
Giving me a lot to think about as well.
Cheers everyone. Nicola's amazing lamp is back in the picture.